Are we really going to throw everything out? All the blood, sweat, and tears poured into this platform for the last 12 years, just for a fresh start? I stared at Marina, our shiny new chief technology officer, as she calmly tapped her pen against the polished mahogany desk, a desk that had only appeared after her sudden promotion. It was as if she was testing the sound of her authority, a rhythm that was entirely foreign to me. "Nadine, you have to understand," she said, not looking me in the eye. "Everything's moving to cloud-native architecture these days. Your system, while impressive, simply isn't in line with where modern tech needs to be." The phrase, modern tech, hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I repeated it quietly. Where modern tech needs to be. The words tasted bitter, like acid on the back of my tongue. The system had been flawless for 12 years. It had processed over $18 billion in transactions. And most importantly, there hadn't been a single breach of security in all that time. I didn't need to remind her. I wasn't talking about a toy project. I was talking about my life's work. You want me to throw it all away? All of it, just because it's not trendy enough? I could feel my voice rise, but I couldn't hold it back. This wasn't just a system. This was me. Every late night, every second spent debugging, every sacrifice I made to build something solid, something indestructible. Marina finally met my gaze. The board has already approved Elliot's proposal. We're not here to debate the rewrite. We're here to discuss your role in the transition. I felt something inside me snap. A cold certainty settled in my stomach, tightening with each passing second. I knew. This was it. My days at Northwell were numbered. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice flat, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. "You want me to document everything, train the new team, and then what? I get moved to a strategic advisory role?" I made air quotes with my fingers, unable to keep the sharp edge from cutting through the air between us. Marina, for the first time, looked uncomfortable, but only for a moment. "We value your institutional knowledge, Nadine. No one knows this system like you do. But legacy systems are liabilities, aren't they?" Her eyes shifted, the words slipping from her mouth as if rehearsed. "Isn't that what Elliot keeps saying in all his fancy presentations?" I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk towards me, the thin paper of the plan crinkling like a prelude to something final. "This is the transition plan," she said, smooth as glass. "The team will need comprehensive documentation on all core modules within 4 weeks. After that, a knowledge transfer phase for 3 months. And then, we'll discuss next steps." I didn't reach for the folder. I just stared at it, the finality of it hanging like an anvil over my chest. I could already see the writing on the wall. "And then, we'll show you the door once we've extracted everything we need." Her words seemed to echo in the stillness of my mind. I left her office without a word. On the way out, I passed Elliot, his smug confidence on full display. The tailored suit, the exaggerated hand gestures as he pitched his latest revolutionary idea to a group of eager young developers. The words floated toward me. Zero trust, architecture, serverless deployment, microservices, mesh. I almost smiled, bitterly. They had no idea what was coming. What they didn't know, what no one seemed to remember, was that the most critical modules of our platform weren't just lines of code. They weren't some generic open-source library thrown together with shortcuts and patchwork solutions. No, these were built on a custom encryption library I'd personally written and maintained under a developer license tied directly to my name. It wasn't company property. It was mine. I turned and made my way back to my desk, my mind already working, calculating. The wheels of strategy began to turn in the background of my thoughts. I remember when I first started at Northwell. It was 2011, a time when the company was little more than a dream. a scrappy startup with 15 employees, operating out of a converted warehouse. The platform was a chaotic mess of PHP scripts and Excel macros, held together by nothing more than duct tape and desperation. Jackson, the founder, had told me during my interview, "We need something robust, something that can scale, something that's secure." It took me 3 years to build the first complete version of the platform. I worked 80-hour weeks, surviving on caffeine and sheer willpower. The early team used to joke that I was more machine than human, typing away long after everyone else had gone home. "Don't you have a life outside of code?" Teresa from accounting had once asked me. I did, but this was my magnum opus. Each line I wrote, every system I architected, felt like a piece of my soul embedded into the very fabric of the company. The platform grew as Northwell grew. From 15 employees to 50, then hundreds. As we expanded across the Pacific Northwest, our client base grew from local businesses to Fortune 50 companies. Through it all, my platform held steady. It scaled, it adapted, it never wavered. The security modules? They were my pride. I'd built them from the ground up, crafting a custom encryption library after discovering flaws in existing options. I called it Parker Crypt. It was my vanity, but I'd licensed it to Northwell under very specific terms, making sure I maintained full authorship and control. It seemed like a small thing at the time, a technicality, but I was meticulous, always thinking ahead. Over the years, executives came and went. Jackson sold his stake and moved on to new ventures. The board brought in new management with shiny MBAs and corporate credentials. Suddenly, we had layers of bureaucracy where there used to be a flat, lean structure. But I kept my focus. I stayed true to the platform, continually strengthening it, adding new modules, improving security, optimizing performance. The system had always been mine. No one could take that away from me. And now, they were about to try. It wasn't the kind of work that stirred excitement, but there was a quiet satisfaction in maintaining something that simply worked. It was reliable, unglamorous, and steady, much like the foundation I'd spent over a decade carefully building. But then came the new wave of leadership, and everything shifted. Marina Carver arrived as our CTO, straight from a high-profile role at a tech giant. She didn't just bring her resume. She brought a thirst for something more, something beyond the reach of Northwell. And soon after, Elliot Navarro made his debut, a consultant with polished words and a sleek demeanor. He had come to help us modernize, her words, not his, and that announcement came with a flourish at an all-hands meeting. Elliot specializes in digital transformation and cloud migration, Marina had said, like some kind of magical incantation, as if these buzzwords would suddenly make our problems disappear. Elliot wasted no time. He charmed his way through the company like a politician, holding interviews, conducting workshops, spinning presentations with an endless array of colorful charts that screamed progress, even as they masked a lack of substance. He spoke with overwhelming confidence about the technologies he barely grasped, making sweeping declarations about how obsolete everything was. "Your platform is interesting," he said to me during our first one-on-one. "Very monolithic, very 2010. It should have been a warning sign, but I didn't heed it then. The first real blow landed during the quarterly technology review. It was my moment, the one I'd spent months preparing for. I was set to present the platform upgrade roadmap, a carefully crafted plan to modularize key components while preserving the rock-solid security foundation that had kept the system safe for over a decade. But when I walked into the conference room, there was Elliot, already projecting his slides. "We've taken a deep dive into the current architecture," he announced, with the kind of smug self-assurance only an outsider could possess, "and identified significant technical debt that's holding Northwell back from true digital agility." I slid into a seat at the back of the room, the sharp edge of anger pressing against my ribs as I watched Elliot dismantle my work in real time. He clicked to a slide that showed complicated diagrams contrasting my legacy monolith, represented by an ominous grayscale block, with his bright, colorful vision of a distributed cloud architecture. "The current system," he declared, as if he were unveiling the truth of the universe, "represents significant enterprise risk. It's vulnerable to single points of failure, limits our ability to leverage cutting-edge cloud services, and frankly, depends too heavily on tribal knowledge." His eyes flicked to me, and the subtext hit me like a slap. I was the tribe, and my knowledge was no longer a prized asset. It was a liability. I couldn't let it go. I raised my hand, the quiet rage growing into something sharper, more deliberate. "Have you analyzed the actual performance metrics of the current system, or calculated the security implications of moving our client data to a distributed cloud architecture?" Elliot's smile was thin, almost condescending. "The benefits of cloud-native architecture are well documented in the industry," he said, as if that was all the answer I needed. "Nadine, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here." "That's not what I asked," I replied, my voice more controlled than I felt. "Our current system has maintained 99.97% uptime over the past 5 years and 0 security breaches. What's your projected reliability for this new architecture?" The room went silent. Marina stepped in before Elliot could respond, her tone smooth, practiced. "These are details we'll flesh out in the implementation planning," she said, her words as hollow as her smile. "Today's session is about strategic direction." Translation: "We've already decided, so stop asking inconvenient questions." After the meeting, James from the development team caught up with me in the hallway. He'd been at Northwell almost as long as I had, and his sympathy felt almost like a betrayal. "That was brutal," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, most of us know the platform isn't the problem. Politics, man." I nodded, appreciating his solidarity, but I knew the limits of it. James had a family to support. He couldn't afford to pick a fight with the new regime. That evening, I stayed late in the office, alone in the dim glow of the screens. As usual, I accessed the repository containing the Parker Crypt library, the very encryption system that had secured our platform for over a decade. I reviewed the licensing terms again, just to make sure. Northwell had a license to use it, but I retained full ownership and authorship rights. I made a complete backup of everything: my personal notes, design documents, everything I had ever written about how the system integrated. A strange, cold calm settled over me as I did it. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That wasn't my way. But I wasn't going to make this easy for them either. They wanted my system gone? Fine. They'd learn exactly what they were losing. The next 3 months were a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. I was simultaneously crucial to the transition strategy and clearly on my way out. I sat through countless meetings where Elliot and his growing team of fresh hires dissected my work, often misunderstanding the most fundamental aspects of the architecture. But I kept my composure. Each misstep they made, each misunderstanding, only solidified my resolve. The more they tore at the seams of the platform, the more I knew. They hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of what was truly at stake. "The authentication module seems unnecessarily complex," one of the new developers remarked during a code review session. "We could replace this with a standard OAuth implementation." I had to bite my tongue. I wanted to explain that the authentication system wasn't complex for complexity's sake. It was designed to handle specialized access control for regulated industries, complete with automatic compliance logging that satisfied 3 different international standards. But explaining that would only make me sound defensive, as though I were resisting change. So I kept quiet, choosing instead to play the part of the dutiful employee. I documented everything they asked for, conducted knowledge transfer sessions, answered questions, but I was selective about how much I revealed, especially when it came to Parker Crypt.
This encryption library? Is this open source?
Elliot asked one afternoon, frowning at his screen as he looked up from his notes.
No, it's proprietary,
I replied, careful in my choice of words.
It's licensed to Northwell, under specific terms.
He scribbled a note, barely looking up.
We'll probably replace it with industry standard encryption, AES or something,
he added dismissively. I didn't bother explaining that Parker Crypt wasn't just another AES implementation. It used a customized version of AES with additional security layers, specifically designed to safeguard our data types.
What would be the point?
He wouldn't understand, and I wasn't about to waste my breath. As the transition dragged on, I found myself more and more isolated. My team, the one I'd built from the ground up, was slowly reassigned to the modernization project. My role, once essential, was now nothing more than a ghost in the machine. I wasn't needed as much anymore. My input became a rare commodity, increasingly undervalued. Then, one Tuesday morning, it hit me. I was alone at my desk, the office buzzing with activity as everyone else sat in a planning meeting I hadn't been invited to. My computer pinged with a calendar invitation. Transition planning, HR office. Tomorrow, 10 Honsk a.m. So, this was it. I spent the rest of the day in a quiet daze, organizing my personal items and downloading my work to an external drive. Nothing confidential, nothing proprietary, just my own notes, my designs, and the Parker Crypt documentation I'd written over the years. The next morning, I met with Vanessa from HR and Marina. The conversation was predictably sterile. As the modernization project enters its next phase, we're restructuring the development organization, Vanessa said, reading from what was clearly a prepared script. Unfortunately, your current role won't exist in the new structure, Marina added, her eyes avoiding mine. We want to thank you for your years of service. I barely heard her. The words felt hollow, like they were falling through me. I was offered a modest severance package, contingent on a 2-week transition period and the signing of a standard non-disparagement agreement. Nothing about Parker Crypt, nothing about my continued ownership rights. Either they hadn't read the licensing agreement, or they didn't think it mattered. Is there anything you'd like to discuss about the transition? Marina asked, her tone polite but with a hint of impatience, as if hoping I would say no. I considered my options. I could raise the issue of Parker Crypt, make it clear that they didn't have the rights to continue using it. I could demand additional compensation or threaten legal action. But something inside me told me to wait. Let them discover the problem on their own. No, I said finally, my voice calm. I think everything's clear. For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the perfect departing employee. I documented additional systems, answered questions, and even helped troubleshoot a few issues with the prototype of the new platform. No one seemed to notice that I never fully explained how Parker Crypt integrated with the audit logging system or the customer data vault. On my last day, there was a small, awkward gathering in the break room. People I'd worked with for years shuffled around, eating cake and making vague comments about keeping in touch. Marina made a brief appearance, thanked me for my service, and disappeared back into the depths of her office. As I packed up the last of my things, James came by my desk. His voice was thick with genuine sadness. This place won't be the same without you. No, I agreed, looking around the empty office. It certainly won't. Life after Northwell was surprisingly peaceful. I took a month off. Sleep, rest, and reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my workaholic years. I updated my resume, but I didn't immediately dive into a job search. 12 years at one company had left me financially secure enough to be selective about my next move. Every now and then, I'd get a LinkedIn message from former colleagues. Mostly casual check-ins, questions about how I was doing.
But about 2 months after my departure, the tone of those messages changed. Hey, Nadine, hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you remember how the compliance logging was configured for the financial services module? We're having some issues with the audit trails. The questions came, one after the other, each more specific than the last. I could feel the pressure in their words, the cracks beginning to show in their confidence. I provided vague answers, nothing they couldn't have figured out from the documentation I'd left behind. But the questions kept coming, relentless. It was clear now. The new system was hitting roadblocks, specifically around the secure components built on Parker Crypt. Where exactly is the Parker Crypt integration documented? Do you have any notes on the custom credentialing protocols? Can you clarify how the token validation process interfaces with the encryption layer? They were struggling, and I knew why. Without detailed knowledge of my custom library, they couldn't replicate its functionality. They were trying to build something new on top of something that was already layered in complexity. Something they didn't understand. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was James. Hey, I answered, trying to keep my voice light. How's it going? In the background, I could hear the din of raised voices. It sounded like a meeting was unraveling in real time. It's a total disaster, he said, his voice low, controlled. The new platform went live last week, and everything's falling apart. Authentication is failing across departments. We've got data leaking between client instances. The compliance team is freaking out because the audit logs aren't capturing the required information. That sounds serious, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Serious doesn't even begin to cover it, James snapped. We've got a major contract with Vectrix Systems on hold because we can't prove compliance with their security requirements. And Elliot? He's nowhere to be found, literally, not responding to calls or emails. And Marina. His voice dropped further, almost a whisper. Marina is looking for someone to blame. I didn't respond immediately. The weight of the words settled into my stomach, a quiet satisfaction mingled with the flicker of something darker. They had disregarded my expertise. And now, here they were, watching it all fall apart. Part of me wanted to say, I told you so. But I'd spent 12 years building that platform, pouring my blood and sweat into it. I didn't want to see it fail catastrophically. Not like this. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice flat. I hope they figure it out. James was quiet for a moment. Nadine, he sighed, frustration evident in his voice. You know they can't figure it out without you. Nobody understands how Parker Crypt works. We didn't even realize how central it was to the entire security architecture until everything started breaking. I stayed silent, letting the weight of his words linger. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, They're going to call you. I knew it was coming. Marina had no other option. She's been in meetings with the board all day, James continued. But when they do call, just remember, not everyone agreed with how they treated you. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, the phone still pressed against my ear. A strange sense of calm washed over me as I processed the information. This was the scenario I'd anticipated, though perhaps sooner than I expected. The question wasn't whether they would reach out. It was how I would respond when they did. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, my phone displayed Marina's name. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more before sending a text. Nadine, we need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the platform. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my attorney, Catherine Williams. We'd worked together years ago when I was setting up the licensing for Parker Crypt, and I trusted her judgment. They've backed themselves into a corner, Catherine said after I explained the situation. Legally, they can't continue using your library without a valid license, and practically, they can't fix their problems without your expertise. I didn't need to hear any more. So, what do you suggest? Let me handle the communication, Catherine replied, her voice steady, professional. If you're willing to help them, we should formalize terms that recognize your value. And Nadine, your value just went up considerably. 3 days later, I sat across from Marina in a downtown law office, Catherine beside me. The conference room hummed with a peculiar energy, the kind that comes when you know the conversation will be more than just a formality. Northwell's general counsel and a representative from the board were present, their eyes wary. Marina looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes. Her hair pulled back severely. The platform meltdown was clearly taking its toll. Catherine wasted no time. Let's be direct, she began, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Northwell is currently using proprietary software licensed to them under specific terms. The battle had officially begun. The silence in the room was thick with tension as Catherine laid the licensing agreement on the table. These terms, she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of a professional who had done her homework, include Nadine's continued involvement with the platform. Since that relationship has been terminated, the license is effectively revoked. Northwell's lawyer frowned, his gaze flicking between the document and us. The software was developed while Ms. Parker was an employee. It's company property, as a separate project. Catherine cut him off, her tone unwavering, with clear documentation establishing her ownership. She tapped the contract. I have the original licensing agreement here, signed by Northwell's previous CTO. If you'll note paragraph 7, it specifically addresses termination conditions. The silence grew as they reviewed the document, their faces tight, eyes flicking between the terms and the cold reality that was beginning to dawn on them. I watched Marina's expression shift from frustration to recognition. She understood the gravity of the situation now. After a long pause, Marina leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. Setting aside the legal technicalities, she said, her voice tinged with a trace of desperation. We have an immediate practical problem. Critical systems are failing. Client data is at risk. We need assistance restoring functionality. Catherine didn't flinch. Nadine is prepared to provide that assistance, she said smoothly, under the right conditions. I leaned back in my chair, listening as Catherine outlined our terms, clear and non-negotiable. 6 months of consulting at triple my former salary. Full authorship credit, reinstated developer license ownership, a formal acknowledgement of my central role in the platform's architecture. Marina winced at the salary figure, but she didn't immediately reject it. The board representative beside her leaned in, whispering something. I could see the wheels turning in Marina's head, weighing the options. After a moment, she straightened up and met my eyes. We can agree to the financial terms, she said, her voice almost mechanical. But the acknowledgement? That creates a complicated precedent. It's not complicated at all, I interjected, my voice cutting through the tension for the first time. You're using my work. You're asking for my help. Acknowledge that publicly. The room fell into a heavy silence. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air as Marina processed the simple truth. Her pride, her strategy, all of it was on the line. We'll need time to discuss internally, the board representative finally said. But Catherine was quick to respond, her voice calm but firm. Of course, but I should note that Nadine has already received inquiries from other organizations and her schedule is filling up quickly. It was a bluff, but a strategic one. Marina's expression tightened. Give us 24 hours, she said, and the matter was settled. By that evening, Catherine received the counterproposal. It accepted most of our terms, with only minor adjustments to the consulting timeline. After a brief discussion, I agreed. The next morning, I walked back into Northwell's offices, not as an employee, but as a consultant with clearly defined authority. The development team's relief was palpable. James actually hugged me when I arrived, whispering in my ear, "Thank God you're back." For the next week, I worked tirelessly, diagnosing and fixing the critical issues with the platform. It wasn't particularly challenging. The problems mostly stemmed from fundamental misunderstandings about how Parker Crypt integrated with the other security modules. Once those were fixed, the system stabilized, and Northwell's platform was operational again. What gave me the most satisfaction wasn't the generous consulting fee or even the public acknowledgement of my work. It was watching the gradual realization spread across the organization. The legacy system they'd been so eager to replace wasn't outdated. It wasn't a relic. It was sophisticated, purpose-built, and highly effective. And they were losing it, not because it was broken, but because they hadn't understood its value until it was almost too late. Elliot never returned to Northwell. I heard through the grapevine that Marina had quietly shelved the modernization project after my fixes proved successful. I completed my contracted work in just under a month, providing comprehensive documentation of Parker Crypt this time, with no omissions. When I walked out of Northwell for the second time, my reputation was restored. My future was secure. 6 months after my consulting engagement ended, I received an unexpected email from Jackson, the founder of Northwell. He'd been following the company's developments from afar and had heard about the platform disaster through his network. "Incredible work," he wrote. "Not just the technical aspects, but how you handled the entire situation. It reminded me why I hired you in the first place." He was starting a new venture focused on secure logistics for healthcare suppliers, and he wanted to discuss a potential role. We met for coffee the following week. "I need someone who can build things right from the ground up," he said, leaning forward. "Someone who understands that flashy isn't always better. And I'm prepared to offer equity this time." 2 weeks later, I joined Cypress Ember as Chief Technology Officer, with a substantial equity stake and a clear mandate: build secure, reliable systems my way. Meanwhile, at Northwell, changes were already underway. Marina stepped down as CTO, citing personal reasons, which everyone understood were connected to the platform fiasco. As I looked ahead, I realized just how far I had come, not just professionally, but in terms of asserting my value in an environment that had tried to erase it. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. The modernization project at Northwell was quietly canceled, and the company began rebuilding around the original platform architecture, with proper credit given where it was due. The news of the reversal spread like wildfire, and my reputation became something of a legend in Eugene's tech community. I found myself invited to speak at conferences on system architecture and security design, sharing the lessons learned from years of building secure, scalable systems. At one such event, I bumped into Elliot in the hallway. He was standing with a group of startup founders, enthusiastically pitching his services, his hands weaving through the air as he spouted the same buzzwords and flashy slides I'd heard countless times before. When he spotted me, his face tightened for just a fraction of a second before he quickly excused himself and disappeared into the crowd. I couldn't suppress the faintest smile. The most satisfying moment, however, came when Northwell's board chair personally reached out to apologize for the way everything had been handled. He wanted to know if I'd considered joining the company's technical advisory board. I declined politely, explaining that my new role kept me fully occupied. "That's unfortunate," he said, sounding almost regretful. "Your expertise would be invaluable." "Yes," I replied, "it would." The words hung in the air between us. I didn't need to say more. At Cypress Ember, I set out to build something new. A platform that was modern without being trendy, secure without being cumbersome, and most importantly, fully documented and properly attributed. Every lesson I'd learned during my time at Northwell went into the foundation of the new platform. I assembled a team of developers who shared my values: substance over style, thorough testing over rapid deployment. Unlike Elliott's approach of chasing every new technology trend, we focused on selecting the right tools for the right tasks. When cloud solutions made sense, we used them. When traditional architecture was the better option, we weren't afraid to buck the trends. A year after I joined Cypress, we launched our platform. The healthcare logistics industry took notice almost immediately. Our security-first approach resonated strongly with a sector that dealt with sensitive patient data and complex compliance requirements. Jackson and I had a clear vision: build something that worked exceptionally well, explain it clearly, and let the results speak for themselves. No buzzwords, no exaggerated claims, just solid technology solving real problems. Parker Crypt evolved too. I open-sourced a version of it, maintaining a proprietary extension for our specific needs. The open-source community embraced it, contributing improvements and expanding its capabilities. It felt good to see something I had built from the ground up grow beyond my control and become a trusted tool in the hands of others. 3 years into this new chapter, Cypress Ember was acquired by a major healthcare technology provider. The valuation was heavily influenced by our platform's reputation for security and reliability. My equity stake meant I could retire if I wanted to, but the work was too satisfying to walk away from. I stayed on as CTO with expanded responsibilities and a team that had grown from 5 to 50. Every new hire heard the story of Northwell, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in the value of building things right and standing up for your work. The acquisition made headlines in the industry press, and several former Northwell colleagues reached out to congratulate me, including James, who was now looking for a new opportunity himself. I hired him immediately. Looking back on my journey from Northwell to Cypress Ember, I realized something fundamental. True success wasn't about fighting against change or holding on to what had come before. It was about standing firmly in the value of your work and knowing when to let go of things that no longer served you. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting your code speak for itself.